Winnipeg Jets hockey is finally sort of back with the Penticton Young Stars Classic, and we've had some standouts, maybe some games that we wished we had back, all coming right up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at AJLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, more than anything, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, the Penticton Young Stars Classic is in full swing, and you know what? It feels good to have Jets hockey back. I feel like we've been deprived for longer than we should have. It just feels nice to have something to watch again. And look, sure, the Young Stars Classic isn't real hockey in the traditional sense because it doesn't count for standings, but I think we've all probably been deprived for long enough to want something, whether it's a teaser, some sort of preseason hockey, which is actually coming up very soon. Anything, right? Any sort of taste of Jets hockey gets us real excited, gets us hyped for the upcoming season. And I think at this point, if I'm being honest, right, you've heard me talk about this season probably being a year that the Jets themselves maybe take a step back with the focus on youth. I think that's okay, right? I don't think it's the worst thing if the Jets are maybe not as good as they were in previous seasons, as long as they move in the right direction. And I think that's kind of what I'm hopeful for this season. So a lot to talk about with the Penticton Young Stars Classic. We've had two games, the first against the Flames, the second against the Canucks. We'll chat about that in just a moment, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Now, like I said, obviously, you know, the Penticton Classic is on, and, you know, this isn't a tournament that counts for anything, but this is often the first exposure a fan base will get to some new young prospects. If you are not really familiar with the Young Stars Classic, either because you haven't watched one before or maybe you're a new Jets fan, this is kind of just an invite sort of thing where, you know, some Canadian teams get together out on the West Coast. They get to play together. And it's been, you know, it's been fun, right? I think you've seen some very open-ended hockey. You have seen some amusingly similar issues with Winnipeg's ability to move the puck out of its own end, as you've seen with the senior club. Interesting that it somehow persists even with the Jets kids, but I mean, it is what it is. It's just a rookie tournament, but it's kind of funny that it happens at both levels. I guess you're just preparing the kids for the senior team, right? But other than that, right, you know, what has really stood out? I guess off the jump, you know, the first thing that kind of did pop up, or at least stand out a little bit, is that this is probably one of the better, young stars teams the Jets have dressed. Usually when they go to these tournaments, they really don't bring many star prospects. The camp invites tend to be guys who probably won't make the pro grade, which is tough. You know, you've got kids who are really fighting for a spot. They're really looking for some sort of a pro contract somewhere, whether it's the ECHL, the AHL, or something, maybe even a little bit higher if they're very fortunate. But usually the Jets haven't been able to find too many contracts out of these invites, which is expected, right? Making the pro jump is very difficult. But this year's team actually has quite a bit from Winnipeg's bigger ranks. Lambert, Chibrikov, Salamonson, Jokin, you know, the ranks this year, the roster itself was pretty strong. So I kind of thought coming into this tournament, the Jets would sort of reflect that. And we've seen some of that. I think the first game against the Flames, while not perhaps a great showing in terms of chance creation, was more a fun opportunity to get a read on guys like Julian, who's actually playing as a wing in this tournament. That's particularly interesting just because he's generally been a center. And as far as I know, he doesn't really, tend to play out wide that much. With his size and skill, I think he tends to really anchor the middle space, which I think at the pro level is probably what he would project to be if he makes the jump. But just for this tournament, they're using him as a winger. I guess it's an interesting thing if you want to experiment a little bit. Otherwise, you're tending to see familiar faces. Lambert is anchoring the first line with he. Kevin He, I thought, was pretty fun. I'll save some of the true camp standouts for later. In terms of like the camp invites, I don't know that anyone has really like blown my mind. Bartow has made some solid plays. I mean, he's had some familiarity with the Moose already, so you sort of know what to expect with him. Solid second pairing AHL defender. Anhorn kind of in that same top 4 defender status. I guess the only thing that's a little bit odd is that, the Jets have really had issues getting the puck out of their own end. But, I mean, again, it's a Young Stars Classic. As I joked before, I guess you're just preparing them for the senior team should they make the jump. But I do hope at some point that the Jets get a little bit better organizationally at that sort of zone exit stuff. I think it's probably why zone transition was a point of focus that came up when Arniel was making his press statement following like the analytics summit, right? I think that was something that he mentioned, and it wasn't by accident. I think the fact that he mentioned it first, whether that's subconsciously or not, probably tells you that zone entries and zone exits have been a point of particular note for the Jets in all situations, whether it's even strength or on special teams, something that I'm sure Winnipeg wants to improve upon on both sides. So interesting that, Winnipeg is still kind of working that out, but otherwise, I mean, the Jets won the first game in overtime. They lost the second one just a little bit ago. That one was a little bit less entertaining. Winnipeg had a nice 2-0 lead for part of the game, and then it just sort of fell away. But, again, I mean, it is what it is. No one really cares if you win or lose these games. I think, if anything, we're just sort of expecting, the Jets to generally not do well in these tournaments. When it comes to the Young Stars Classic, we usually have a very bad record. So if we actually win a game, it's a pretty good day and mission accomplished on that end. So tomorrow the Jets actually have a matinee game, which will be interesting. It'll be an afternoon one. I mean, I'm not really expecting anything. At this point, you just kind of want to see some rotations, get a look at some of the young prospects. I will say that some of the new arrivals in terms of guys like Jagger, well, they have done enough to stand out to me, and I'll talk about why in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Just like assembling a supercharged, amazing championship caliber team like, say, the Winnipeg Jets, you've got to find the right chemistry, the right components, and the right, really the right supplier, right? Whether you're drafting or signing free agents, buying car parts actually isn't all that different. eBay Motors has superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style. They've got a massive selection, and they have over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for because they've got eBay's Guaranteed Fit, where your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge victories. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting about Winnipeg's Penticton Young Stars Classic so far. And I gave some overall vibes. I've had fun watching it. I will admit it's been a little hard to do some individual player tracking just because I've had to watch on my phone for most of the tournament. And at times I didn't have the volume. So everyone's wearing random numbers. Some guys have familiar numbers like Lambert and Jubrikov, but some of the other young kids, it's been a little bit harder for me. So apologies if I maybe don't have fully formed observations. But like I said, I mean, are we really going to read too much into the results? No. This is just kind of a fun little diagnostic, and I think that that's how you really should view this tournament. It's a little check-in. It's a cool little thing to see how some of the prospects are developing, get a sense of who might be fighting for a spot sooner than later. And actually, I think on that front, there was a surprise for me with one of our recent arrivals. But before we talk about who that might be, just wanted to say thanks again for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NHL. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, in terms of standouts, the first guy that you probably want to hear about is Brayden Yager. And also, apologies if I keep saying his name wrong. I've heard Yager, I've heard Jaeger. I'm going with the pronunciation from the Red Deer Rebels broadcast team, but maybe that's not right. If somebody has heard differently, let me know. I've heard every variation of it, so I would just like to know exactly which one people tend to use. But going with Yager, I would have to say he really stood out as a very smart, intelligent two-way center who's definitely got some middle six pop. He hasn't really scored much at all. He hasn't really found himself on the score sheet or anything in particular, but I think he's gotten off some dangerous shots. He's made some good defensive interceptions, particularly in the offensive zone. I feel like he's forced some turnovers, and I just like his commitment in the two-way game. I think in terms of what you'll see from him, especially if you watch some of the highlights, don't know if the Jets are going to be putting much footage up from this tournament, but Yager definitely likes to work the perimeter, which is very Ehlers-esque. His skating is generally strong. He makes some good passes, takes some good shots. I've just noticed him being very engaged in the play, which I think is good, right? There's no question the engine's there. You can maybe ask about the total upside of his like high-end offensive skills, but overall, if you're talking about commitment, if you're talking about maybe a fit for the Jets, I think culturally and perhaps on the ice, he definitely seems to be a guy that Winnipeg would rely upon. And honestly, for a player who, kind of came into this Jets org being relatively new to a lot of us, having been traded from Pittsburgh, I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I'd heard about his offensive pop as a center. I heard some mixed reviews on his, overall upside. I heard some things that maybe his game was a little simplistic. Maybe he didn't have some of the truly elite tools that some of the other kids do. But from what I saw in this tournament, just in the first two games, I came away feeling pretty impressed with him. I think he'll be a really solid middle six player. I don't know that he's going to be a 2C necessarily. I know a lot of people in the comments have talked about him being that second line center. I think it's a little premature to get to that point, but I will say, for those of you who are perhaps hoping for some optimistic perspectives, I think he's actually going to be fighting for a spot with the Jets as soon as next year. I don't think he's necessarily ready to make that jump next season unless he has like a transformational year this season. But from what I saw this year, I think he's going to be putting up a pretty good preseason and camp performance next year. The fact that he's done, enough to really stand out to me in this tournament already in just a couple of games kind of tells you that compared to some of the other Jets prospects, he is probably further along than, some of the guys who have been in our system for a little bit. I came away impressed with him. I thought he looked really active and engaged and lively. And you know what? If nothing else, he has shown that he's probably closer to being pro ready than he is not. So just one more season, probably in juniors, and then he'll be up with the Jets or with the Moose. I feel pretty confident he's going to make the Moose at least. Whether he goes for more, we'll have to just be patient, right? I don't want to rush him, and I think, Winnipeg does kind of need him to maybe fast track a little bit, but they don't want to throw him in on the deep end. But I will say that if he does make the Jets next season, I could see him starting off in a bottom six role, and I think he'd actually do well there. Defensively, he's very responsible. He kind of ticks off a lot of the boxes of what the Jets tend to like in their centers. He's got a smart brain. He makes good situational reads. He's got a good IQ for that sort of stuff. So in that respect, I think that there's a lot that he already does naturally that, for the Jets means that they have to coach him a little bit less on some of the decision-making stuff. So overall, obviously you're not going to use this to base your entire picture and analysis of him on, but if you're looking for first blush, he looks pretty solid. He looks like a good player. He looks like a pro-ish player. Maybe there's a couple of things that he'll want to work on, maybe making better use of the shot, a couple of other positioning and read situational things. But otherwise, you know what? First game from him, I came away feeling pretty happy with what he was able to put out there. Other guys who stood out, obviously Jacob Julian has been, I don't know, he's been one of those players that's really risen quickly in Winnipeg's system, and I think there's good reason for that. Aside from his size and physical attributes, he just seems to be a smart player. Like Jagger, he's defensively engaged. He backtracks and really tries to work the corners pretty aggressively. He makes good reads. I really do feel that, at some point he does crack Winnipeg's roster, perhaps in the bottom to middle six role. He has really had a meteoric rise, I would say, since kind of taking over for London's offense. But, how much of that is him and how much is it London's offense? I think there's generally been the question with his game. But from people who have sat there and tracked him a lot closer than I've been able to, it sounds like he actually is contributing a ton to London's offense. I think in this tournament so far, he's shown a lot of experience, a lot of savvy, and I'm really excited to see what he can do. I've kind of anointed him as one of, Lowry's potential successors, right? Winnipeg is definitely developing a type as a center for their, I would say, depth roles. Sizable, good puck movers, good two-way players with some scoring punch and obviously fine stick handling, some offensive skill. Guys who can maybe bring a little bit more than we're getting with some of our centers currently, and a little more versatility, I think, certainly wouldn't be undue. So with all that said, Julian, I think has done enough to certainly merit a look, for the pros in the very near future. I'm excited for him. I think he's got some real potential to be a decent pro. Same kind of tier that, I think Walton could reach at some point. Walton hasn't exactly been able to make a big impact in the couple of games so far, but again, it's 2 games in a rookie tournament. Are you really going to read that much into it? No. Obviously, if you're looking for guys who have definitely made their mark, you can't really not talk about Lambert and Chibrikov, but that's kind of to be expected. I do want to talk about Lambert this episode just because I think he probably merits his own sort of separate analysis, but suffice it to say he has stood out. He's been, this is going to be the year of Brad Lambert. That's the best way I can say it. I think he's going to really shine for the Jets. I guess my only question is where he plays, whether it's at center or at wing. And I know everyone's like, he'll be our 2C. It'll be fine. Throw him in there. And I just, as I've always said, I like him a lot. I think he's a really smart kid, but I think that there's still work to do before I feel like he's going to man that position and do it really, really well. If it was like 3 or 4C, I don't think I'd really have as many reservations about tossing him in and seeing if he can swim. But with the 2C role, that's fairly big responsibility for a young rookie. And you still see some of the, perhaps riskier passes and reads that you do want him to clean up a little bit at the pro level in this tournament. But like I said, I'll focus a little bit more on him directly in just a little bit. If I'm looking for guys who I maybe want to see a bit more from, I guess Barlow and Salamonson probably want to speed their games up a bit. I think both are going to be fine long-term. It's just, adapting to the pro level reads, getting up to speed. That stuff may take a little bit of time. Salamonson's coming from an overseas league that, had, different time and space, right? A little bit more, I would say, on both ends. That meant that, in North American hockey, he's going to be rushed a bit more. He's going to have to make those snap reads. He's going to have to speed up his processing. And I think with how good he's been overseas, I really don't worry about that. Barlow, I think he just has to be a little more engaged, a little more industrious, get involved in the play more, and he'll be fine. He's tracking to be a solid middle sixer. I think that's where I've had him the whole time. If he can really translate some of the skills, especially that release and the shooting ability that he naturally has, into something a little bit more, well, maybe you can start to see him in a more prolific role. But I think for now, middle six is probably where he pans out, right? And I think that's totally cool. Having more peripheral and depth scoring for the Jets, especially if you can really punish those minutes and pound the puck home repeatedly in like a third or a fourth line role, I have zero complaints about that. Otherwise, I think the Jets have had about sort of what you'd expect. Winnipeg has defensively looked a little bit, vulnerable at times, which, again, you're playing kids in like the first tournament that they've had in probably a few months. So you expect a few bumps and bruises. Again, I don't really watch these to have like super, super deep analysis, mostly just sort of a diagnostic to see where folks are. And I think if we're reading into that level of detail, then again, what you see is pretty much what you get with this team. I think the Jets have some really good young talents that are very near pro roles, and some of those roles are going to translate to big roles with the Jets. And the guy that I'm really referencing here, aside from Chibrikov, who's had a couple of goals, look, it's Brad Lambert, all right? Lambert continues to be one of my favorite prospects in Winnipeg's system. I am still sometimes pinching myself that he fell to the Jets, and I think this tournament is showing why so many of us have really talked about him being a big, big player for this team going forward. But before we kind of chat about why I'm so excited about him and what I could realistically see him doing in this upcoming season, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. We all know that building, a championship roster requires top-end candidates, and sometimes finding those candidates can be really painful. But when you're a business employer, you also have to realize that time is money. Indeed totally gets it, and that's why they have such a great system. They help you schedule, screen, and message so that you can connect with candidates faster. And you're not just hiring faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. And that's really important because you are spending money to advertise, and you want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. Indeed leverages over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, and their matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And as somebody who has actually used Indeed when I was looking for work, I can personally attest to the fact that they actually do match you to really good positions. They help you match based on your salary requirements, your work experience, an extensive resume builder. All of this stuff actually gives you positions that are routinely relevant to what you're interested in, what your work background is. I still get emails about positions that actually match what I need or would be looking for. Should I be looking for work in the future? And you know what? For employers, that's probably the biggest endorsement that you can hear. And, you don't just have to take my word for it. Over 3.5 million businesses worldwide use Indeed to hire great talent fast. So if you are interested, just know that listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just wrapping up real quick with some thoughts on, some really fun stuff, I guess. The biggest thing, obviously, coming from the Penticton Young Stars Classic is, Brad Lambert. Now, I know that some of you are like, Brad Lambert, all right? We've heard a lot about him. Why are we, still so excited, right? How could you possibly overhype him any more than you already have? And look, I'm going to be honest. I think Lambert, aside from being one of the best rookies in the AHL last season, every time I watch him, I just come away feeling like he's a real high volume, high involvement, exciting young player who I think for me is going to be the closest thing the Jets have had to a star forward in years. I think it would have been Ehlers if Ehlers had been able to stay healthy and actually be used as a top-end forward for this team, but we all know that didn't really happen with the Jets. So we've been, I think, looking for a marquee name for a long time. And I don't just mean somebody who scores a lot and is fancy. I mean a player that everyone across their fandoms recognizes the name of. Laine was probably that guy. Scheifele, I thought, could have become that player, but I feel like most people just associate him with some of the hits that he's had, which I think is a little bit unfair. I mean, he's a really good player and has been one of the best creators for the Jets for years. But again, I still think he tends to be a little bit underappreciated, even by some of us. I mean, I've certainly had my criticisms about his game over the years. Maybe I've been a little too harsh at times, but we just have high expectations as Jets fans. And that's where I think Lambert really, for me, ticks off so many boxes. You don't really see him take shifts off. He backchecks aggressively. He doesn't always make like astoundingly great defensive reads, but that's not what you're really asking him to do, right? You want him to be a great creative top-end talent. And look, he's certainly not playing NHLers right now, but I can tell you from the footage that we've had of him, from the games that we've been able to watch, all I can say is I think he's going to be a star talent for this Jets team. His skating is effortless. He's constantly creating either down the middle or out wide. His passing and vision are fantastic. His shot, he tends to use sometimes a little too much. That might be the one, I guess, critique I have, is that maybe you'd like him to be a little more patient with stuff. But if there's a guy who like desperately just wants to get the puck to the net, it's Brad Lambert. And I really don't think that that's a bad trait to have. Somebody who's constantly wanting to create and make use of his line mates effectively. That's what we've sort of been banging on the table for a long time. And I really feel like he is starting to look more and more like the player that, several years ago, people had him projected as a top 3 draft pick. And I think he really is that level of talent. Whether it'll all come together at the NHL level, obviously, is still up for debate. I think that there's plenty of room for him to continue growing. But so far, compared to where a lot of people thought his game was a few years ago, he is just, I mean, I do think this year he's going to be fighting for the Calder Trophy. I have a lot of confidence in him. I don't know where he'll play yet. I'm not sure what his overall role is, but I think he's going to be in the mix for the Calder. I feel very confident about that. I think he's going to be one of the top 5 choices for the trophy. I don't know if he'll win it, but I do think he'll be in the running for it, which is great because the Jets very seldom have that. And if he's anywhere near the top of the finalist pool, you are just having yourself a grand old time. You think about him being drafted at the end of the first round, like 30th overall, if I recall correctly. And you just think about his journey to, coming from a Lahti Pelicans team that was, quite frankly, not run very well, to where he is now potentially being one of the most recognizable prospects in our pool. I just really feel like it's going to be the season of Brad. I think he's going to have a big year for the Jets. And if he somehow takes the second line center role and really earns it and runs with it, I mean, it's going to be one of the best draft picks in franchise history. So I'm just really excited. I don't want to overhype and oversell him. And I feel like I do that routinely because I have a particularly soft spot for him. I love him. He's one of my favorite prospects. And I feel like I probably should set my expectations myself, for myself a little bit lower, just to give him some breathing room and some room to grow. But I don't know, man. Every time I see him, I just keep coming away thinking how much he's grown, how impressed I am, and how much I think he's going to be one of those names that for the next 5 to 10 years you associate with the Winnipeg Jets. So let me know what you're feeling about Brad. Are you excited about him? What do you think you're going to see out of him? Drop your thoughts and comments in the section below if you're on YouTube, or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Over the next couple of days, we'll have more preseason coverage. We'll have a Penticton Young Stars Classic wrap-up after the last game tomorrow. And, of course, the ramp-up to the start of the season is really just in its end stages. We're almost there. Jets hockey is almost back, and if you ask me, I could not be happier. So we'll talk tomorrow about more Jets hockey. Until then, as always, have a great night, and, of course, go Jets, go.